standing at the kitchen counter, pouring the second half of my coffee into a travel mug when my phone buzzed against the granite. I almost didn't look. I was already running 4 minutes late, and my brother-in-law had sent me 17 texts in the past 2 weeks that all turned out to be nothing. But something made me glance down. It was my accountant, Deborah. Not my brother-in-law. Not a spam number. 3 words in all caps. Do not swine. I set the travel mug down so fast it sloshed over the counter. I called her before I even processed what I was doing. She picked up on the first ring, which told me everything I needed to know about how serious this was, because Deborah does not pick up on the first ring. She makes you wait. It's almost a personality trait. Elena. Her voice was flat and clipped in a way I had never heard from her before. Where are you right now? My kitchen, I said. I was about to leave. The closing is at 10. Do not go to that closing. A pause. Actually, do not leave your house at all. I'm 20 minutes away. I need you to sit down, and I need you to not call your sister. The line went quiet for a second, and I heard her car blinker clicking in the background. Deborah, what is happening? I found something last night, she said. In the trust documents. Alina, I don't want to say this over the phone. Just stay there. Lock the door if you have to. 20 minutes. She hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment. The coffee was spreading slowly across the counter and dripping off the edge onto the tile, and I watched it like I was watching something happen in a dream. My sister Fiona had called this closing the finish line. That's the phrase she used 2 nights ago when she called to go over the timeline one more time. The finish line, L. We're almost there. And she had sounded so warm, so relieved that I had actually teared up a little. I thought we were doing something beautiful. I thought we were finally doing right by our mother. I went to the sink and got a paper towel, and I cleaned up the coffee very slowly and very carefully because I had nothing else to do with my hands. Deborah arrived in 19 minutes. She didn't knock so much as pound. When I opened the door, she walked straight past me into the dining room, set her laptop bag on the table, and pulled out a folder that was so thick it had a rubber band around it. Sit, she said. I sat. Before I show you this, I need you to think back. She was still standing, flipping through the folder. When your mother passed and the estate went into the revocable trust, who handled the transition paperwork? Fiona, I said. She offered. She said she had more time than I did because of my work schedule, and I was still a mess from the funeral, so I let her. Deborah nodded slowly. Like I had just confirmed a suspicion she'd been holding for hours. And when you agreed to sell the Hargrove Street property, the rental house your parents owned, who drafted the first version of the sale agreement? Fiona's husband. Owen. He said it would save us money on attorney fees. She finally sat down across from me. She opened the folder and turned it toward me, and I looked at the first document. It was a deed of distribution from the estate, dated 11 months ago. My name was on it as a co-trustee. So was Fiona's. But the beneficiary breakdown had been amended. I had to read it twice before the numbers registered. The original split our parents had written gave Fiona and me equal shares of all estate assets, including the Hargrove Street property, which had been assessed at $420,000. But this amended version, the one with my signature at the bottom, gave Fiona 65% and me 35%. I did not sign that document. I have never seen that document in my life. That's not my signature, I said. My voice sounded very far away. I know, Deborah said. I've had it looked at. It's close, but it's not yours. The notary stamp is also irregular. The notary whose name appears on this retired from practice before this date. I looked up at her. Someone forged this, I said. Someone forged this, she confirmed. I sat with that for a moment. Forged. The word felt like a word from a movie or a news story. Not a word that belonged in a sentence about my sister. The same sister who called me every Sunday. The same sister who flew in from Portland when I had my appendix out 4 years ago and slept on my couch for a week and made me soup from scratch and watched every season of a cooking competition show with me because she said I needed something with low stakes to focus on. There's more, Deborah said. The Hargrove Street closing that morning, the one I had been about to leave for, was not what I thought it was. I had believed we were selling the property to a young couple, the Aldermans, first-time buyers, offer accepted at $410,000, split evenly between Fiona and me as co-trustees of the estate. Simple. Clean. But what Deborah had found the night before, buried in the preliminary title report, was a second purchase agreement filed against the property 3 weeks earlier. A different buyer, a holding company called Red Brick Solutions, LLC. Purchase price, $440,000. And the seller listed was not the estate trust. It was Fiona Grayson, listed as sole successor trustee with no mention of me. Red Brick Solutions LLC had already wired a $50,000 earnest money deposit. If I had walked into that closing this morning and signed anything, I would have been authorizing a sale under the original agreement while a completely separate transaction was already in motion under documents that had erased my name from the title. My signature today would have created a paperwork conflict that, in the chaos of untangling it, would have buried the forged deed under layers of competing filings. I would have been handing her the confusion she needed to finalize everything before I understood what I had agreed to. She was going to let me sign, I said. Not as a question. The closing was her idea, Deborah said. She suggested the date. She suggested the title company. Elena, the title officer handling this closing, worked for a firm that lists Red Brick Solutions as a client. The cold that moved through me then was not panic. It was something worse than panic. It was the specific stomach-dropping feeling of looking back through a year of decisions and realizing that none of them had been random. The date Fiona volunteered to handle the paperwork. The moment she gently suggested Owen draft the sale agreement because it would be cheaper. The closing she planned for a Tuesday morning when she knew my caseload was heaviest. None of it was kindness. All of it was architecture. I closed the folder. "What do I do?" I said. Deborah looked at me steadily. "You don't sign anything today. You don't call Fiona." "And you let me make some calls." I nodded. I went to the window and looked out at the street, which was completely ordinary. A neighbor walking a dog, a FedEx truck pulling away from someone's porch, the world proceeding as if nothing had shifted on its axis. My phone lit up on the table. Fiona calling. I let it ring. She called again 4 minutes later. Then she texted, "Hey, just checking, you're on your way?" "Traffic is fine on the bridge, should be clear." 2 exclamation points. She always used 2 when she was performing warmth rather than feeling it. I had noticed that before and dismissed it. I noticed it now differently. I put the phone face down. Deborah left 2 hours later with a list of next steps and a referral to an estate litigation attorney named Kenneth Park, whose name she said 3 times so it would stick. I sat alone in my dining room after she left with the folder in front of me, and I tried to do the thing she asked me to do, which was approach this like a problem to be solved, not a grief to be felt. I'm a project manager. I manage large commercial renovations for a firm downtown. My entire job is finding the load-bearing elements in a complicated structure, identifying what happens if it fails, and containing the damage before it does. I am very good at this. I am, professionally, the least emotional person in any room. I could not do it. Not for the first hour. I sat there and I thought about my mother, who had spent the last 2 years of her life making Fiona and me promise we would not let the estate come between us. She made us promise at the kitchen table in the old house in Evanston. She made us hold hands when we did it. I remembered the feeling of Fiona's hand in mine, warm and slightly dry the way it always was, and how sincere it felt. And I put my face in my hands, and I allowed myself exactly 12 minutes of falling apart before I pulled the folder back toward me, and I started reading from the beginning. By 2 in the afternoon, I had a legal pad with 4 pages of notes. By 4, I had an appointment with Kenneth Park for the following morning. And by 6, something else happened that changed the shape of the entire situation. My phone rang. Not Fiona this time. An unknown number with a Portland area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Is this Elena?" A young woman's voice, careful and quiet, like she was speaking so no one nearby could hear. "Yes," I said. "Who is this?" A pause. "This is Chloe, Fiona's daughter." Another pause. "Your niece?" I knew Chloe, of course. She was 20, a sophomore at Portland State, quiet and serious in the way that children who grow up in loud households sometimes become. I had not seen her in person since Christmas, but we texted occasionally, book recommendations mostly. Things we had both read and wanted to talk about. She was thoughtful. She never seemed like her parents' daughter in the way that phrase usually means. "Chloe," I said, "are you okay?" I'm at school, she said quickly. Mom doesn't know I'm calling. I've been trying to decide if I should for like 2 weeks and I just. She stopped. Started again. I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. Last month at the house. I came home for the weekend and Mom and Dad didn't know I was there yet. And I heard them in the kitchen. What did you hear? The silence that followed was the kind that means someone is deciding how much they can afford to say. She told Dad the plan had to move faster because you were asking too many questions about the estate distribution. She said you had emailed the original attorney and she was worried he might actually respond. Her voice was very steady, the way people get when they are delivering news they have been bracing themselves to deliver. She said the property had to be in Redbrick's name before you figured out what she did to the deed. And Dad said, what about Elena? And she said. Chloe stopped. What did she say, Chloe? She said you'd make a fuss for a while, but you'd get tired of fighting and then it would just be done. She said you always let things go eventually. I had no response to that, because it was true. I did let things go. I had let things go my entire adult life, specifically with Fiona. Specifically because keeping the peace felt like the more loving choice. Every time I smoothed over a disagreement or accepted a version of events that didn't quite match my memory of them, I thought I was being the bigger person. I had been making it easy for her. There's something else, Chloe said. I took a screenshot of an email on her laptop. I know I shouldn't have. I've been carrying it around for a month and I didn't know what to do with it. Can you send it to me? I already sent it. Just now, while we were on the phone, to your Gmail. I switched over. The email was from Fiona to someone named T. Alderman, 2 weeks before the closing date, with the subject line timing question. It read, in part, if the dual close is flagged during title review, we delay the Hargrove filing by 72 hours and proceed with the second instrument. The key is making sure E signs the first agreement before she has any reason to look at the second one. E. She had abbreviated my name in the email like I was a logistical variable. I sat with that for a long moment. Chloe, I said carefully, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Did your mom ever ask you to do anything? Sign something, say something about me or about the estate? The pause was long enough that I had my answer before she spoke. Last week, she said. She asked me to write something out. A statement. She said it was for a legal thing and that you had been making the estate process difficult and she needed family support on record. Her voice dropped. She said if I helped her, she would pay my spring tuition. She said it wasn't a big deal, just paperwork. Did you write it? I started to, and then I didn't. She exhaled. I couldn't. The things she wanted me to say about you weren't true. That you had been erratic at Grandma's memorial service. That you screamed at her in front of people. None of that happened. I was there. You didn't do any of that. Something shifted in me at that. Not relief exactly. More like the specific vertigo of a puzzle piece clicking into place when you realize the picture is worse than you thought. The statement Fiona had tried to get Chloe to sign wasn't just about the property. It was about me, my behavior, my reliability, my fitness to be a trustee. She wasn't just stealing my share of an inheritance. She was building a paper record to argue I shouldn't have one. Chloe, I said, you did exactly the right thing by calling me. I mean that. Are you safe right now? I'm at my dorm. Mom thinks I'm in class. Okay, don't tell her we talked. And if she brings up the statement again, just say you need more time. Can you forward me that email from a new address she doesn't have? Already on a new email, she said. Sent it from there. I don't know if I have ever felt more simultaneously devastated and grateful for another person's courage than I did in that moment. Chloe was 20 years old, and she had just put herself in an impossible position out of a sense of basic fairness, and I was not going to let that cost her anything. That night, I laid everything out across my dining room table. The forged deed, the dual-close documentation Deborah had found, the email Chloe sent, the legal pad with 4 pages of notes from my own review, photographs I had taken with my phone of the relevant pages, uploaded to a folder Kenneth Park's office could access. I worked until midnight. My apartment was very quiet, and the city outside my window was doing its ordinary nighttime things, and none of it felt real. but the documents in front of me were entirely real, and I kept coming back to them. There is a specific kind of grief that comes with discovering that a betrayal you were looking at did not happen in a moment of weakness or impulse. This was not a mistake. This was not a bad decision made under stress. This was designed. Fiona had looked at our mother's estate, at 2 decades of a family asset, and she had sat down and built a system to take it. She had used Owen's position to draft fraudulent paperwork. She had used a captive title officer to facilitate a quiet dual transaction. She had tried to use her own daughter as a character witness against me. Every step required planning and advanced knowledge of how title transfers, estate law, and family dynamics actually work. She knew I trusted her. She had counted on it. I thought about my mother, who wanted us to hold hands when we promised. Then I turned back to the documents because I had learned something important in the last 18 hours. Grief is information, but it is not a strategy. Fiona had a strategy. I needed a better one. The meeting with Kenneth Park the next morning lasted 2.5 hours. He was a small, methodical man who asked questions in a very particular order and wrote everything down in pencil, which I found oddly reassuring. At the end of it, he leaned back and said, quietly, that what we had was unusually solid for this type of case, and that the dual close structure, combined with the forged notary stamp, represented not just civil fraud, but potential criminal exposure for both Fiona and Owen. We have 2 options, he said. We pursue this through estate litigation, which will take time and will require your sister to respond to discovery, or, he paused and tapped his pencil once on the pad. We let the transaction proceed just far enough to expose itself. He explained it simply. Red Brick Solutions had already filed its purchase agreement. The title company was moving forward on a timeline. If we allowed the closing to appear to proceed while simultaneously notifying the state's Attorney General's office of the fraudulent notary and the dual close documentation, we could let Fiona believe the transaction was on track right up until the moment regulators arrived to halt it. The $50,000 earnest deposit Red Brick had already wired would be frozen pending investigation. The fraudulent deed would invalidate any transfer of title. And because Fiona had already sent the email to T. Alderman explicitly describing the intent to execute before I could review the second instrument, there was a clear paper record of premeditation. She has already accepted money she cannot legally deliver, Kenneth said. She sold something that isn't hers to sell, I said. Essentially, yes. I sat there for a moment. She's going to call me, I said. She'll want to know why I missed the closing. She'll try to reschedule. Let her, he said. Don't answer any questions about the estate. If she pushes, tell her you've been overwhelmed with work. The more ordinary you seem, the better. I did exactly that. For 2 weeks, I was the most ordinary version of myself I could manage. I returned Fiona's calls, kept them short, said nothing about Deborah or Kenneth or Chloe. I told her I had a big project deadline and asked if we could push any estate conversations by a couple of weeks. She said, of course, absolutely, take your time. 2 exclamation points. I counted them. On a Thursday morning, while Fiona was on a group video call with her book club, which I know because she posted a screenshot of it to her social media 40 minutes before it happened, the title company's office received a certified letter from the Illinois Attorney General's Division of Consumer Fraud. 3 hours after that, a compliance investigator walked into the title officer's office with documentation from Kenneth Park's firm and a subpoena for all records related to the Hargrove Street transaction. Fiona called me 4 times that afternoon. I did not answer. She texted, "We need to talk, Elena. Something happened with the estate and I want us to handle it together like Mom would have wanted." I read it twice. The appeal to our mother. Even now. Even at the very end of the architecture, she reached for the load-bearing wall. I put the phone down and I didn't respond for 72 hours, which I want to say felt powerful and decisive, but actually just felt like the loneliest 3 days I have experienced in a long time. There is nothing that clarifies the cost of a relationship like watching someone demonstrate exactly how much they valued it. The investigation moved quickly after that, partly because the documentation was clean, and partly because Red Brick Solutions turned out to have a prior civil complaint in another county for a similar dual-close scheme involving a different estate. Owen had a working relationship with the company that predated our mother's death by 18 months. They had been planning this before she was even gone. I won't go through every detail of the legal process because it is still ongoing and Kenneth has given me parameters about what I can say publicly. What I can tell you is that the forged deed was declared void. The Hargrove Street property returned to the estate trust with both Fiona and me listed as co-trustees under court oversight, which means neither of us can move a dollar without a judge's signature. The aldermans, the actual first-time buyers who had made the legitimate offer, were still interested, and the sale to them is proceeding correctly, with the proceeds split according to our parents' original terms. Equal shares, 50-50. The way it was always supposed to be. Chloe transferred schools this semester. She's at a program in Chicago now, closer to me. We've had dinner twice. She's extraordinary, genuinely, in the way that people are when they make an integrity decision at enormous personal cost and don't make a performance of it. She doesn't talk about what she did with much drama. She says she just couldn't write the things her mother asked her to write because they weren't true, and that felt like the whole answer to her. I think about that a lot. Fiona called me once after the investigation began, a real call, not a text. She was crying, actually crying, and she asked me why I hadn't come to her when I first found out, why I had gone straight to lawyers instead of calling her, why I hadn't given her a chance to explain. I thought about what to say for a long moment. I gave you 32 years of chances, I said. I let things go, Fiona, over and over. You said I always would. I paused. You were wrong about that one. I hung up. I still think about my mother asking us to hold hands at the kitchen table. I think she meant it as a protection, like clasping hands against something she was afraid would happen after she was gone. She wasn't wrong to be afraid. She just didn't understand that the danger wasn't coming from outside. It was already at the table. The Hargrove Street house closes next month. I have not been back to see it. It's a small 2-bedroom craftsman on a corner lot with a porch that my parents repainted every 3 years without fail, alternating between the same 2 shades of green. I remember sitting on that porch in the summers. I remember thinking it would always be there. Some things you carry forward, and some things you let be someone else's memory. I learned something through all of this that I want to say plainly, because I think it is useful and not everyone says it directly. Love is not the same thing as trust. You can love someone completely and still need to verify what they're telling you. You can grieve the loss of who you thought someone was while simultaneously protecting yourself from who they actually are. These things are not contradictions. They are just the truth of certain situations, and learning to hold both of them at once, without letting the grief erase the clarity is, I think, the actual work. The estate will be fully settled by spring. My half of the Hargrove property will go into a separate account my sister has no access to, per court order. I have a good accountant who picks up on the first ring now, for me at least. I have a niece who drove across town in the rain, metaphorically speaking, to tell me the truth when she didn't have to. That's not nothing. That's actually a great deal. Sometimes the way you protect what matters most isn't by holding on louder. It's by reading the paperwork more carefully than the person who forged it. I keep coming back to one specific image from all of this. Not the forged deed, not the email with my name abbreviated down to a single letter like I was a line item. The image I keep returning to is Chloe on the other end of that phone call, speaking quietly so no one nearby could hear her, carrying a screenshot on her phone for an entire month because she couldn't figure out what the right thing to do was, and then doing it anyway. She was 20 years old. Her mother was offering to pay her spring tuition. The path of least resistance was so obvious and so available. And she called me instead. That's the part of this story that I think actually matters underneath all the legal filings and the frozen earnest money and the certified letters from the Attorney General's office. What matters is that Chloe looked at a situation where dishonesty would have cost her nothing in the short term and chose honesty anyway, at real personal expense, because the alternative required her to write things about me that she knew were not true. She couldn't do it. Not because someone told her not to. Not because she calculated the odds. Because she has a certain kind of internal architecture that doesn't bend in that direction, and I think that architecture was built over years of small decisions that nobody was watching. Fiona built a different kind of architecture. That's the thing that I have had to sit with. She didn't become someone who forges deeds overnight. You don't just wake up one morning and decide to use your own daughter as a character witness against your sister. That particular capability was constructed slowly over years through a long series of smaller choices to cut a corner here, to let a half-truth stand there, to prioritize what she wanted over what was accurate until the distance between those two things stopped registering as a problem. The fraud at the end was just the logical conclusion of a much longer process, and I had made it easier. That's the part I had to be honest with myself about. Every time I let something go with Fiona, every time I accepted a version of events that didn't match what I remembered, because fighting felt like more trouble than it was worth, I was communicating to her that the cost of being dishonest with me was essentially zero. I was not being the bigger person. I was teaching her that I could be managed. What I understand now, that I didn't before, is that letting things go is not the same as being forgiving. Forgiveness is something you extend after a wrong has been named and acknowledged. Letting things go is just avoidance wearing a more flattering coat. I was very good at avoidance. I called it keeping the peace. It wasn't keeping anything. It was just postponing the reckoning until the stakes were high enough that postponing was no longer an option. Deborah picking up on the first ring. Chloe making the call she'd been sitting on for a month. Kenneth Park writing everything down in pencil with the specific patience of someone who has seen this before and knows exactly what it requires. The people who showed up in this situation showed up because they had built, over time, the habit of doing the hard thing when the hard thing was what the moment required. That's not talent, that's practice. It's a choice you make in small moments long before anyone is watching, and then one day the moment arrives that needs everything you've built, and either you have it or you don't. I think about that whenever I'm tempted to let something slide now. Not because I'm afraid of fraud, but because I understand, finally, that clarity is not unkind. Seeing what's in front of you and naming it accurately is not the same as being difficult. It's the only way to actually protect the things that matter. The Hargrove Street house closes next month. Equal shares the way it was always supposed to be. That's not a victory I'm celebrating. It's just the thing that was true, restored.